Hi, I'm Carl Wyman, and today I'm pleased to talk to you about taking a scientific approach to science and engineering education. And now, what I'll cover today is I'll start out looking at this most general, broad perspective, really looking at how the brain learns scientific and engineering thinking, say a little about what that means, but then I'll be focusing down, taking those broader ideas and then talking about how we apply them in the classroom and do experiments, measuring results. And so we can, get research data and principles out of that. And then the last part will be focusing down even tighter and looking at the detailed findings we get from this kind of classroom research about the specific elements of what works and what doesn't work to improve learning and why, in both the design and the implementation of tasks. And so these are very much things you can use directly in your teaching. And I'll say that this really defines teaching expertise. Now, before I get into that, I'll give you a little background of how I got started in this work. And it sort of shows my perspective on the kinds of things I focus on. And it really came not from my teaching, but working in my atomic physics research program and working with the students there. And I saw that they had this strange puzzle to me, that they had many years of great success in their physics classes, and they wouldn't get in my lab otherwise. But then in the lab, they were, at least at the beginning, really clueless about how to do physics. And yet there was clearly not something fundamentally wrong with their brains, because after just a couple of years working in my research lab, they'd turned into great physicists. And after I saw this enough times, I realized there's something strange going on here. This isn't a peculiarity of an individual. There's some fundamental question about learning here. And this was 30, now getting closer to 35 years ago. And so I started treating it as a science problem, looking in detail at what the research was on how people learn and how particularly they learn physics. And after a couple of years of looking at this, I realized, okay, I could understand and explain this. It wasn't a puzzle, it made sense. It also made me realize there are much more effective or potentially more effective ways to teach than what we were doing in most of our courses. And it got me started doing science education research, doing the kind of experiments and collecting data and getting principles very much like in physics, but applied to the teaching and learning of physics. And now it's 100 or getting up towards 150 papers published on this now. But all of this work, my whole career, has really been focused on the idea of expertise, thinking like a good scientist or engineer, and what that is and how we can most effectively teach it so people can learn that. Now, there's actually been major advances in the past just couple of decades on this idea of how does one learn complex thinking? And it's come from three complementary research fields, actually. The cognitive psychology looks at the details of how people think and learn, brain research, and then the kind of research that I do of doing experiments in university science and engineering classrooms. Now, at the most general level, what all of this research come together to give us is a fundamentally new picture about how learning happens, at least learning of these complex ideas. And the old model, which is really still dominates our thinking about university teaching and education, is that these students, they come in, the brains come into our classroom and they vary in different ways. And we immerse them in knowledge and it soaks in, different amount depending on the conditions of that brain. Now, with this thinking about learning, then the focus is almost always on selecting the best brains, running, more and more admissions tests and so on. And the second part is then also worrying about, okay, what's this knowledge soup, the curriculum? What should we put in it, which topics, in which order, and so on. Now, this old model is just fundamentally wrong. What research is showing us now is that's not at all the way the brain learns. What really happens is these students, at least what comes into the universities, they're really very much the same, but that brain is quite changeable. So it's not a question of filling it up with knowledge. It's really transforming that brain, rewiring how the neurons are hooked up. And that rewiring takes place in response to intense thinking, but it's really that rewired brain has completely new, improved capabilities from what it started out as. And brain imaging actually can show this. I mean, here's two fMRI images of two brains. One of them is that they're both interpreting a medical X-ray image. The one on the right is a medical student who's just learning how to do this. The one on the left is a very experienced expert radiologist. And you can see how their brains are being activated in just completely different ways. And in other studies, people can actually watch the brain, how the brain activation changes as people learn. Oops, something happened there. And so what the brain research is telling us is really that the learning process is about enhancing the relevant neuron connections. And so it's really much like muscle development, and it shows that the type and intensity of the exercise, just as that's important for muscle development, is important for the brain development and developing these new brain capabilities. But this also shows, like muscle development, that the brain really only learns what it practices, what it exercises in this process. So this is a very general perspective, but really the most important thing you should take away from this talk is just thinking learning is just not the way we've always thought about, of taking a brain and putting knowledge into it in this fixed brain. It's changing it in some fundamental ways. So now I want to work to focusing down, showing, okay, that's not just hypothetical. We apply these ideas now in university classrooms, and we can measure the results, and we get data and show detailed principles. So there's, I could point to about 1,000 studies that are sort of similar to this, but I'll just pick a couple that I've worked on. This is a learning in a large introductory physics class, and we found it was a giant class. All the engineering students have to take it, and so there were two sections of about 270 students each, which by a whole bunch of different measures were really identical. And so then the experiment was, one of these sections was taught, the control was taught by someone who was a highly experienced professor with good student ratings, but used a standard lecture approach. And the other section was taught by some relatively new PhD trained in these principles and methods of research-based teaching in my program. And these two instructors, they agreed to cover the same amount of material in the same class time. And then there was a jointly prepared exam they gave at the start of the next class to see how much the students had learned from those classroom sessions. Just to emphasize this one, because people almost always think, oh, if you're going to teach this active learning way I'll tell you about, you can't really cover nearly as much material. This was a comparison to look if you could really, thinking carefully, could cover as much material. And you'll see how the result in the learning over that material. So in the experimental class, what are students doing? Well, like I say, this is a kind of general pattern used in many classes, but first they had a short pre-class assignment to prepare them for class. And this is really just to take the learning of basic facts and terminology, not waste class time on that when it can be just read ahead of time just as easily. And then in class, rather than telling students information, they're given questions to solve, like this one. The class starts with this example of you've got a circuit with batteries and a battery and a light bulb here, and they're asked to predict what's going to happen when that switch is closed. And they have to predict what the brightness of bulb 2 is going to do. And every individual student has to answer that question. In the old days, we used separate clickers. Nowadays, everybody just does the same principle on their mobile phones. But the student presses a button on the clicker or phone, and the computer then records who they were and what answer they chose. Now, they're not given what the answer is or shown the vote at that point. They actually then have to discuss this with their neighbors. And, in a giant class like this, students sitting on either side of them, discussing what the answer is and why, and then they re-vote. And while they're doing that discussion, the instructor isn't just standing up there waiting for them to finish, is circulating around the aisles, listening in on those conversations. It's giving them a little snapshot about what's going on in students' brains. What aspects are they thinking as like a physicist and they understand, and what are they confused on? Then demonstrates what happened, shows them results. And then the instructor has a follow-up whole class summary. And this really gives feedback to the students on which of their models and reasoning were correct and which were incorrect and why. And I stress the incorrect because very often when instructors are teaching something like this, they'll say, oh, a bunch of you got it wrong. Here's what the right answer is, and then go on. And one of the things cognitive psychology shows us is that's really a mistake, that when the learning takes place, it's not when you do something right and you get that confirmed. It's when you do something wrong and you understand why that was wrong and how to change it. And so going over why the incorrect answers are incorrect is actually the most important aspect of this feedback. Okay, this weren't all just simple conceptual questions like this. This course had more mathematical stuff in it as well. And for that, students had to write out answers on worksheets, but they, again, still talked to each other and had to turn these in. So if you think about what's the thinking going on here that students are having to do, well, they're practicing the thinking like physicists. I mean, if you think about it, in that question, they have to formulate a conceptual model of electricity, think how it would apply in this situation and manifest itself in the brightness of a light bulb. And they then critique their reasoning and the relatives of their fellow students. So this is the same kind of cognitive processes that physicists spend their lives doing. And while they're doing this, they're getting guiding feedback on how to improve. They're getting from their fellow students, they're getting it by comparing what they predict with the demonstration, and they're getting it from the instructor who knows lots more about what they're thinking than in a normal lecture class. So, okay, we did measure results. Remember, we had an identical surprise quiz given to these students after they'd had a week of classes on this. And here's the histogram of those results with the score along here, the number of students here. And in the standard lecture, see that's the red, blue is in the experimental class. Now, it's pretty obvious. There's a profound difference here. It's actually probably a little bigger than you realize, because on this particular exam, random guessing on average would give people about 3. So the amount of learning that's taking place is really how much above 3 you see people are. And when you think about that, you really realize how tiny the amount of learning from lecture actually was. And, this isn't an isolated example. I've got many other examples that I could show you that it's really remarkable how little people learn from lectures. Also, I want to stress how this is clear improvement, not just for the top students doing better or the weaker students doing better. The whole distribution's moved up. So this is really shows this is really how the human brain learns, and everybody in that class with a human brain does better with the kind of teaching that we had in the experimental case. Okay, I don't want to take time going into too many studies here, but I'll just give you another subject, another way of measuring this, but applying the same principles and doing the same kind of experiment. This is comparing the standard lecture approach with exactly the same kind of teaching that I just illustrated in the physics example of giving people questions and working to discuss and answer in small groups. Here, though, rather than two different teachers, we have the four instructors who taught these are the four core introductory computer science courses at UC San Diego. And they measured the drop and failure rates from those classes. And they did it 1 year, actually just for several years, going these averages. And then they converted to this sort of, call it scientific teaching, research-based teaching. And you can see across all the different instructors, the failure rates drop dramatically. And so now actually, you have the same instructors, same people, but they just adopted these better methods. They now have about a third the failure rate that they used to. Now, the examples I just showed you were in introductory courses, and most of the university education research has been done at that level. But my own group and a few others have been doing more work applying these ideas to more advanced courses. And we've been able to do that and show that it makes a big improvement in learning. And this particular reference here is for a fourth year course, and the details of what it's about aren't really very important, but it goes into a lot of details about the design and implementation of instruction at such an upper level course. And these are examples of what these look like, because these are obviously much more mathematical. So people are working through these worksheets and talking in groups while the instructor is circulating around, monitoring what they're doing, and occasionally bringing the whole class together to give them feedback. And we've now transformed most of the upper division, or really not all, most of the courses for the Stanford physics majors are now taught in this way with good success. And even it's the same idea has actually been applied now to advanced quantum field theory and written up with, again, really dramatic improvements over the way the course had been taught before. And the structure of all of these courses, it just to give you an idea of the basic orchestration during class, the students will have some brief preparation they have to do before class. As I noted, instructors will introduce what they're going to be doing for the day. And then the whole class time is really spent going through this cycle of the students working in groups through the activities, typically working for 10 to 15 minutes to do a section while the instructor's monitoring that. And then the instructor will pull them back together, spend a few minutes answering questions, giving feedback, making sure everybody's kind of caught up on that particular part. And then the students will go on to the next part and continue through to finish the task or finish class, hopefully simultaneously. So the really two essential features in teaching this way are the students are spending their time thinking, they're having to answer questions, practicing expert reasoning, exercising their brains in the right way. And the instructor is providing very knowledgeable feedback that has the critical issues of being very specific and targeted and helps improve learning. I might just mention that with the other factor we've seen, particularly at Stanford, is once the instructors learn to teach this way, they all enjoy it much more. So those were just a few examples of about 1,000 that I could actually give you that there's big meta-analysis here. These show consistently greater learning, particularly kind of learning that tests how well the students are actually making decisions like a good expert physicist or engineer would, and lower dropout and failure rates from the courses. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to getting into much more detail, sort of pick out the particular detailed findings from classroom research about things that are critical for the proper design and implementation. And these are all things that hopefully you can see how to use yourself. So this is my slide that sort of summarizes the entire field of, say, education, research in these science engineering disciplines. The key aspect, what's ultimately the most important is that the students are learning. They're practicing making decisions with good feedback, where that feedback's timely, specific, and actionable. That's all those things are critical. But then there's a bunch of things that go into making sure that the design of what they're being given to do, the decisions they're having to make, these features up here go into that design. And then there's general areas about implementation in the classroom to make it effective. We found there's a bunch of specific things that really matter. So, this is actually a whole lot like science, and that it's a complicated thing. There's a bunch of things there's a million ways to do it wrong. There's a bunch of things you have to get right to be successful. And if you are, it just plain works a lot better. But it does mean that people have to start thinking about, at least at the university level, teaching in a different way than they have in the past. It's not just knowing the subject and going in and telling people that. It's doing all of these things. And if you do them right, you will get a lot better learning than if you don't. And so to this extent, it really defines teaching expertise. And so I'm going to go through a number of these. So I'll start with the disciplinary expertise. You want to make decisions like somebody expert in that decision in that discipline makes. And so that has to go into the design of what they're doing. And so this is an area that my group has actually been doing a lot of research on the last few years, and I think it advanced it a lot, is understanding problem solving, how experts in science and engineering and now even medicine, how they solve authentic problems in their disciplines. Now, by authentic problem, I mean the kind of things they do in their actual work, not these artificial textbook problems. So all of these things, solving problems involves making a set of decisions with limited information. And what we were kind of astonished to see when we probed a whole bunch, 50-something people across there, going in detail, solving a problem in their discipline. We found out they were making the same set of 29 decisions across all the fields of science and engineering. And what you may wonder, what on earth are these decisions that are so common? Well, they're things like deciding what concepts and models are relevant to the problem. So what information's relevant, what's irrelevant, and what's needed, and then deciding how you're going to get that information and setting priorities, deciding on what approximations and simplifications are appropriate, then deciding on potential solution methods to pursue. And then there's a bunch more. Obviously, I don't go through a full list of 29 today. But there are things like deciding on gathering information, how you represent the information, deciding on the reliability of the information you have, deciding on what conclusions you can draw from it until you get close to the solution. And then there's how to test what if that solution makes sense, if it could be done better, what are ways it can fail. Now, although these decisions themselves are the same across all these different fields, it's really important to realize that making any one of these decisions requires a bunch of specialized disciplinary knowledge. And the best experts are the best at recognizing what knowledge is most appropriate to call upon to use to make any individual decision. So it doesn't mean you can teach people to go off and just make decisions. It has to be a context and what information you need to make these decisions. I'll also mention, though, that all of these, if you think about it, are made with limited information. You never have enough information to be absolutely certain about this, because if you did, there wouldn't be any problem. It'd just be following a procedure. And so real, scientific problem solving is making the best educated guess guided by experience and knowledge. Now, if you think about what we teach, though, in classes, okay, we've got these set of decisions here, but think about a typical problem that's in a textbook or given on an exam. None of these things are asked for. The concept, conservation of energy, whatever it is always completely obvious. They're always given just the information needed and only that information. So this critical element here of sorting out what matters in a real problem is taken away. They're told what approximations to make and so on. They're never asked to give a confirmation check of why their answer makes sense. So, you realize, once you see this, you realize, no wonder my students could do so well in classes, but not be able to do physics, because in classes, they were never given any practice, and therefore their brains never learned how to make the real decisions that are necessary for being a physicist and solving problems. And so it's really critical that the learning that you want has to put these exercises you're giving students, has to have them practice making these decisions in some authentic problem context. And that's really going back to thinking about this is having them exercise their brains in the correct way. Okay, let me go back and talk about some of this. So, the problems, though, it's sort of obvious. They have to be at the right level for the students' prior knowledge and experience. Obviously, if they're too easy, they're trivial, they're not worthless. And if they're impossibly hard, then they're pointless. They need to be challenging, but not impossible. And the motivation is also critically important here. To really do learning, the student has to put in intense mental effort. The brain has to be doing the right things. And that means it has to be motivated. And so there's a bunch of things that go into motivation. I don't have time to go into all of them right now, but they're, they do also depend on a student's individual interests and background. Then there's brain constraints. And I'm going to say a little about that because these are really important and well studied in cognitive psychology and not recognized at all in actual teaching. And there's a couple of ones that are important here, but the one that's most significant has to do with memory. And I'm going to give you a slightly simplified view of but a little bit technical view of memory. So there's one part of it called the long-term memory. And this is what, when we normally talk about memory, people think about. It's got this very large capacity, remember enormous amounts of stuff, and it works for very long duration, years, decades. So that's kind of what's sitting in here. But then there's something else, there's called the short-term working memory. And it's really a buffer that information has to go through before it can get into the long-term memory. And this buffer or working memory, it's very different. It has a tiny capacity. The typical human brain has about 6 items it can keep in working memory, and it has a much shorter time scale. It lasts for just kind of minutes. And in fact, you can think about this as just it's kind of the number of things and the length of time one can pay attention to something about. But because of this this limited capacity, when you hear or see, or student hears or sees some new thing, it actually pushes things out. So they see something new, and that working memory can't hold all. Something gets pushed out of working memory, and therefore never gets processed and into long-term memory. So this is really important when you think about teaching, because particularly the idea that any additional items that, if you like, go into working memory, i.e. get a person's attention, that reduces the processing and learning of the other material. And so if you think about what's happening in class, one thing is just, particularly in lecture classes, students have split attention. I mean, I sit in the back and look at the Stanford lecture halls, and it's kind of horrifying, the large fraction, normally majority of the students, who are actually looking down at their cell phones, texting, looking at, have their computer at home, but they're surfing the web, checking Facebook, etc. But because of this working memory limits, I mean, that means they're paying attention to a lot of other stuff, and it's just a disaster for actually learning anything. And this is, really well studied. It's also shown that people are very bad at recognizing how big an impact splitting attention has on their learning. Now, so that's one of the just avoiding split attention, which is a good reason to have students really having to actively be working on something in class, because then there's much less chance of their attention being divided. But also anything you can do, the teacher can present in class matters here. So introducing additional jargon or some, fancy, pretty picture that gets their attention as opposed to just a crude sketch. Those things, because they get their attention actually, or they have to keep track of, actually hurt learning. So you really want to reduce those. The thing that students and instructors get the most upset when I bring up is that those interesting little digressions or jokes that everybody likes, they actually hurt learning. And this has been studied. And students say, oh, that can't be. That's the only time I pay attention in class. And the instructors say, oh, that can't be. That's the only time the students are paying attention in class. But that's exactly the point, that they're paying attention to the joke, to the funny story. That means there's less memory left, there's less working memory left for them to actually process the material. So it really does actually reduce the learning. Now, if you have a joke that is completely intimate with the ideas of the physics or something you're going to try and get across, that's different, but that's not usually what happens. Okay, so let me, I'll say just one other quick thing, because I have time here, about the brain constraints, which has to do with long-term recall. And there's a key element, which is that the biggest problem in long-term recall isn't getting the stuff into the long-term memory, it's recalling the right stuff out. And the reason this is hard is because as you lose learning new things in your long-term memory, that's because neurons are getting hooked up to record that information. But when you learn chapter 1, and then you go and learn chapter 2, neurons get hooked up a lot, and that new learning interferes with the recall of the old learning. And so the idea of dividing teaching up into chapter 1 and then it's all done, you don't ever talk about it again, then chapter 2, chapter 3, etc., is bad, because you really need to occasionally go back as you're doing chapter 3, go back to the material in chapter 2 and 1 so people think about it again, and that actually cleans up the interference, essentially strips away some of those erroneous neuron connections that interfere with long-term recall. Okay, I'm going to move on here to a couple of things about research on important NAS of implementation aspects. So first, you've got to design good practice tasks. We already talked about that. But in the implementation, it's important that there be clear deliverables. These really define the task, they make sure students are working on things, and they guide the feedback that you can give to the students. And there's, I say clear deliverables, they're going to be, if you're working in groups, ideally, you always want to have clear deliverables for individual students, but ideally there's also some kind of deliverables for the group to encourage them to work effectively together. Now, I want to talk about the aspect of social learning, because this is an area, again, that research provides some pretty non-intuitive results. So in these examples I had, we have students working in groups in class of 3 or 4. I'll just tell you that's the right number. Bigger or lesser than that don't work as well. But there's often get this question about why is it useful to have students working together with each other? How can, talking to fellow students, some which may not know as much as the student themselves, how can this be better than them just thinking by themselves? Or how can talking with fellow students be better than listening to the expert instructor explain the subject, who knows it much better than fellow students? And the reason, so in fact, it is true that people really learn more by talking to their fellow students than they do from hearing from the instructor, and we've published some papers on this. But the reason that this works this way is we get from the cognitive psychologists, which is that the process of a person explaining or teaching to somebody else really triggers a unique and different cognitive processing within their brain. The human brains just evolved to think about things differently if I'm going to be in a social interaction about that information. And there's lots of evidence showing that triggering this kind of social learning aspect of the brain actually produces more learning. So a student doesn't even need to teach somebody else or explain something. They just think they're going to have to. They actually learn more. But in classroom time, this discussion clearly enhances the learning of the students doing it, but basically all of the students, as well as giving students some kind of feedback from their peers as they're processing. And then finally, having students work together and talk about it is really useful for a good teacher. Should be listening in on those conversations. It gives you a much better idea of what's going on in students' brains. And so you can then provide much more effective and targeted feedback to them. Okay, so I'm just about perfectly on time here. So in conclusion, I think research shows the clear characteristics of good design and implementation of a different form. Let's call it active learning. It's really the practice and feedback to exercise the brain to develop its capabilities in new ways. And we can measure this now and consistently and straightforward way to show that it produces much better learning, particularly learning of kind of thinking a lot more like an expert than the traditional lecture does. Now, I'm going to before I go into question period, I'm going to point at a question that I always get. And so I'll ask it before you can. I get faculty say, but traditional lectures can't be as bad as what you're claiming, where I'm claiming they produce very little learning. On the idea that look at all us university professors who were taught by traditional lectures and look how well we turned out. And my answer to that is think about bloodletting. It was the medical treatment of choice for actually 2,000 years, but it was based on exactly the same logic that, oh, we took some blood out of people and look, they survived, and the point of what science is about is doing careful, proper comparison groups. And so, if you think you were a great success with the teaching you had, the real question is how much better could you have been, how much more successful, and particularly how many of your classmates would have been much more successful if they had actually been taught by these better research-based methods. So I'll stop here. I'll just say I'll make my slides available because I've covered probably more than you can fit into your working memory. And here's a bunch of references that are my favorites. These are books here covering the basic ideas of cognitive science and how that can be applied in university teaching. ABCs of how we learn, I particularly like. And if you're a student, this book is probably the best for you because it talks about these cognitive processes and how you can practice them yourself, even if they're not being built into your teaching. Then here's a bunch of resources on the CWSEI website of implementing specific things like how to have students do pre-reading, exactly how to set up group work, etc. And here's our reference on this expert problem-solving process that we've just published. So thank you for your attention.